Hi, it's been a while. Happy Halloween! This is my shabby attempt at some kind of costume. I was told that it's been a few months since I did a book video. Actually, the thing is, in my head, I did think about doing like a wrap-up every month. But then I read so many books, say 12 books, that when the month came to an end, I had a hard time deciding like which books I was going to talk about. And then another month goes by, I read another 12 books, and now I have 24 books to think about. I just ended up like paralyzed, so I ended up doing nothing. And then another month goes by and I read like another 12 books. I complained about this to my partner, and then my partner was like, why don't you just talk about some books? You don't need to talk about all of the books. The thing is, I get it, but at the same time, I felt like that was not being fair to the books that I didn't choose. I do want to get around to talking about like maybe 90% of the books that I read. For my own sake, I'm just going to categorize them by, say, like theme. So the theme for today is Halloween reads, yay! What I define as Halloween reads are books that have a sense of mystery to them, but it's not about like a police procedural or like a murder mystery kind of setting. What really makes something scary or spooky is when there is ambiguity, or when there is a suggestion of the supernatural, or alternatively, even if there is nothing supernatural, the sanity of the protagonist or the narrator should become suspect. I didn't realize I had so many books I wanted to talk about. Okay, I'm going to try my best to talk only about what is important. I'm not going to go into like the details of the plot. Book 1, The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. So this author is already pretty established. From what I know, she's kind of popular on like Book Talk. I'm not on Book Talk, so I don't know, but I have seen her on like Book Talk lists on Twitter. So she's famous for like other books that she has written, like Ninth House. I picked up this book because when I look at the word The Familiar, my first thought is witchcraft. For example, have you ever read like Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials? I read that when I was in secondary school. I would say it's very formative in the sense that it made me question the kind of like Christian propaganda that was being dished out to me on the daily in my Protestant missionary school. The phrase the familiar implies to me that there is a kind of like detachment of one's soul, you know. In this case, the familiar is a little bit different. The familiar takes the form of a man who made a deal with another man many centuries ago. He is immortal, but he is kind of like bound to serve the other man and all of his descendants. The main character is a girl called Lucia. She is basically a converser, which is a Jew who has converted on the outside at the very least in order to survive the Spanish Inquisition. She's working as like a scullery maid in a low to middle income class household. The house is not very rich, as I mentioned, but they aspire towards social mobility. We find out very early on that Lucia actually is capable of magic. She sings certain phrases in a mix of languages and can improve things. And her mistress catches on to witchcraft in her household because she came down to the kitchen and she saw that the bread was burnt, and then she went back up, and then when she came back down, the bread is magically okay. And she's like, and this woman is really smart. Her mistress is really smart in the sense that she cannot be gaslit. She starts to suspect that there is a witch living in her household. What she does is she sets a trap. So she makes sure that she makes Lucia's life very difficult early in the morning, and then she leaves a torn dress lying in wait to see if Lucia will fix it in order to avoid more scoldings. And Lucia fixes it and falls into her trap. This mistress of hers decides then to use Lucia as a kind of circus animal to perform for some very important people at a dinner in her shabby household. They gain the attention of somebody who is looking for a miracle worker. This puts Lucia in the path of some very dangerous men. Lucia also is then confronted with her own ambition and her own desire. I've seen some people like complain about the romance plot in this book. Usually, I would agree, but I feel that the romance in this story was kind of important. It was part of Lucia's character development for her to allow herself to fall in love with somebody, to choose a life and to choose a future. I'm not saying that she can't do all that without a man by her side, but like she chooses him, and she chooses to use her power for herself for the very selfish reason that she loves him and she wants him to stay. I think that is significant. Okay, I've yapped enough about this book. I'm going to move on to the next book, The Hysterical Girls of Saint Bernadette by Hanna alkaf. I managed to get an ARC of this book, and for this author, I have basically read all the other books that she has written. She usually tends to write like YA, not like YA romance, but like middle grade YA. She's written like a wide range of stories. It's not all like one particular type or like a set kind of formula. So that's what I like about her body of work. I think that even though she writes family-friendly stories, her books are enjoyable even for the adult reader. And I also like that she's not afraid to write about dark themes. We're not talking about like 16, 17, we're talking about books for like 13, 14-year-olds, you know? And she's not afraid to talk about things like sexual assault, especially within the family, which is the most common form of sexual assault. She's also not afraid to talk about suicide, about grief, about loss, about dealing with the death of a loved one. And I think like, you know, it lends a kind of well-roundedness to her books. During wartime, people do get affected, and these people include young children. So moving on to this book in particular, this book is set in a mission school in Malaysia called Saint Bernadette's. I think in Singapore we have our own fair share. I was in a mission school, co-ed, thankfully, and even in my school, which had like over 100 years of history, there were so many ghost stories. You know, girls' toilet on the 3rd floor behind the science lab, there is something there, don't go there at night. Or they will say like somebody jumped from this parapet when they stayed overnight for their camp. They saw things, they heard things. Very, very common. I think like every school has stories like that. I also heard an explanation for it, which is that apparently the government builds schools on killing grounds, you know, on like burial grounds. And in order to counteract the yin energy or like the negative energy, they built a school on it, and then they let children in it, and then children are supposed to be young and energetic and have a lot of yang energy, you know, like yin and yang. I hate that pronunciation. And it's supposed to kind of counteract the negative energy of the place. It sounds plausible, but I'm not so sure that I approve of using young children like this. So anyway, this book makes use of that common understanding that mission schools, the building itself, many of them have history, many of them are haunted, many of them are creepy. The premise of this book is that there is some kind of mass hysteria afflicting the girls. There is no like correlation between them. You're not from the same class, you're not from the same level, not from the same CCA, not even from the same race. The protagonist, she is recovering from having been sexually assaulted by her mother's new partner. She's been unable to speak. She becomes involved in this screaming case because one day it gets her sister. She realizes that the girls who scream, after a while they disappear, and she's very, very worried that something is going to happen to her sister, that her sister is going to disappear. So she decides to step out of her comfort zone, investigate. She finds out that in this school there was a screaming case years ago, and the teachers who were teaching then, they do remember it, but for some reason everybody is like not allowed to talk about it. So she needs to go and investigate by herself. The reason behind the screaming was predictable, but the going about it was not. They made it very, very clear that the school, haunted or not, is not a malicious entity. If there is anybody to blame, it is the men who act with impunity are honestly perverts. I'm trying not to spoil the ending for you. You kind of know what's going to happen, but at the same time, for the whole book, I feel like we are being misled into thinking that it's going to end a certain way. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like that was a right way to end things. Okay, next book, Hekla's Children by James Brogden. This book is how do I explain it? When I first read this book, I thought it was going to be like a simple, some children go missing in the woods, there is a supernatural thing going on, their teacher needs to go and find the children because he's such a good teacher and he loves them very much. You know, that's what I thought was going to happen. What I didn't expect was the scale of this story suddenly took an epic turn. There are some children who go missing in the woods, and their teacher does try to look for them. However, this other world that they stumble into is not really like our concept of the underground, like in Pan's Labyrinth or something. We are talking about like a literal other universe connected to other universes. So there is a multiverse happening inside this book. In this multiverse, time is fluid. Somebody's daughter could be a grandmother by now, but they are still young. You already know what's going to happen. It's going to be those kind of like fucked up time traveling twist that happens at the end. One gripe that I did have was how the story was very obviously crafted to try to loop everything back to the front, to give an explanation for why the evil entity existed. If you watch enough anime, you will know that the evil entity is there because he represents the darkness of mankind or something like that. Even as it happened, I felt that it didn't really fully explain why our kind-hearted and devoted teacher will get so angry that he morphs into a malicious, self-sabotaging creature. The transformation didn't seem like fully justified. I would say that it is pretty ambitious. It's good for a little bit of escapism. Moving on, my favorite book of the year, Mouth by Puloma Ghosh. This is a collection of short stories. For me, I needed time to process after each story. It took me longer than a usual novel to get through this book. And I also really enjoyed this book, so I wanted to prolong the experience. What I like about the stories over here and why I would classify it under a Halloween read is that there is a certain degree of the fantastical or the surreal in each story. I think like the first story is the most iconic one. What I liked the best were actually the first and the last stories, but actually I liked all of the stories, but the first and the last really stood out to me. So in the first story, it's set in some kind of dystopian alternate universe or future. There is some secret war going on, so communications have been cut. There is a girl living in a small town with her mother. Her father disappeared years ago. Her mother is working for the government, so everybody hates them, and on top of that, she is the only visibly South Asian person in this town. And then one day another South Asian girl shows up. They become ice skating rivals. I'm thinking Yuri on Ice, and she starts to suspect that this rival of hers is actually not alive, that she's some kind of vampire. She has a lot of experience looking at dead bodies because of her father's job. She feels that this girl is definitely not an ordinary human being. It's precisely because this girl is not alive that she finds herself extremely attracted to her. The attraction seems to be reciprocal. It's very weird. I think that you need to go in with a certain level of preparation, like mental preparation, because these are not like ordinary short stories. They are weird, they are a bit gross, there's like a lot of blood. I feel that the overall tone of this collection is unsettling. I liked it so much that I wrote a review for every single story in this book, and it took me so long. I felt like I was reviewing 11 novels. Okay, next book. The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monika Kim. So this book was trending for a bit. I think it's still trending right now. I like this book because the protagonist, she's crazy. Okay, hear me out. The main character is Ji-won. She is a Korean living in America. She has a younger sister. Her father left the family to go and be with someone else. She wants her father to stay, but on the other hand, he's kind of being a piece of shit. One day, her mother gets a new boyfriend who is this old white guy. He very obviously has a fetish for Asian women. He will eat at like say Chinese restaurants, and then he will very openly ogle the sexy Chinese waitresses. If the waitress that serves him is not young and hot, he gets angry and he says that this place is not authentic. He also tries to act like he is the arbiter of what is good Asian cuisine. He tries to speak Korean very badly, and he says that he learned it because he went to Korea during the war. She thinks that this guy is a fucking pervert, and she thinks that she is in danger and that her younger sister is in danger. And this turns out to be true because she overhears him talking on the phone where he describes her younger sister in a sexual way, saying that she's a slut because she's deliberately wearing these short shorts around him to entice him. It's very disgusting. She starts to go a little bit batty. She starts to dream of eating eyes, his eyes. She also starts to get like a weird stalker in school, and he became obsessive, so she has to get rid of him. This book is a trip. I really liked it. I liked that it was unapologetic. I liked that the protagonist committed crimes and that she got away with it. The perspective was skewed. I think that we need to have more books where the author is unafraid to show one side of the story without having to balance it out. Moving on, New Seoul Park Jelly Massacre by yeeun. Call this a Halloween read because scary things happen and there is a supernatural explanation. So the scary thing that happened is that there is a new theme park, and when people went to the theme park, they were given jelly. When they ate the jelly, by the end of the day, they started turning into jelly and they melted into puddles and they basically died. And the reason behind this is because of the devil. I know this sounds crazy. Basically, on the dark web, there is like an online cult, and they believe that he is going to come, and that when he comes, they are going to have a Sabbath. One of the theme park employees, he's been trying to gain access to a particular book that will help him summon the devil because he wants to bring about the Sabbath. Anyway, everybody dies, everybody turns into jelly. The park just hired cleaners to clean up the jelly, which are corpses by the way. Their focus is on reopening so that they can continue to make revenue. This book, right, it looks simple on the surface. Like, you read it and you're like, huh, what the fuck is happening? You're like, oh, that was a crazy story. Close the book. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt that it was trying to say something about society, which I guess you can say about any other book. But no, hear me out. The reason why this idea of the devil was used was to show that all of these misfortunes happened because society is so dysfunctional and so focused on money making and on propping up the patriarchy that even after something like a massacre happens, people refuse to accept that it is a massacre. They refuse to accept that people turn into jelly and died. They rather believe that these people went missing and that the jelly just appeared out of nowhere. And it's people like that that enable the devil to continue to do his work. When I look at all the other characters in this book who were affected, so there are all these societal ills that I felt were sort of subtly being hinted at. It's deeper than it looks. The next book I want to talk about is an ARC that I got on NetGalley. I would classify it as a Halloween read because of the atmosphere and the suggestion of dark magic. This book is definitely dark academia. It's not just set in a school where bad things happen. I would agree with the concept of dark academia as a book that critiques the institutions like the history of colonialism that props up these prestigious universities. The main character in this book, he is from a single parent household because his father was an alcoholic and he died. He managed to get into Cambridge through hard work. He studies music, and when he gets to school, he is wowed by the place, but he's also stressed about how expensive it is to live here. He's constantly thinking about how to make his money stretch, and then he's surrounded by all these rich kids who walk around as if they own the place, and in some respects they do. Some of them didn't even get in because they studied for it. They didn't even take their exams, and then their parents managed to buy their way in. This book does a very good job of showing that even in universities like Oxbridge, you might be tempted to romanticize the architecture, the history, but all that would be to ignore the fact that for a maybe invisible population in the school, it is not a beautiful and perfect place where the only acceptable emotion to have towards it is gratitude. So the main character, he develops an obsession towards this guy called Bryn, B-R-Y-N, Bryn Cavendish. Bryn Cavendish is owed money, and his father was a magician who became a little bit infamous because he started dabbling in the occult. He has daddy issues. No matter what he does, he can't seem to get his dad's attention. The protagonist, or I guess you can say the narrator, because he's not really the protagonist of his own life, the narrator also has daddy issues. Even though he doesn't have the socio-economic status to match, he tries to ingratiate himself and he tries to infiltrate Bryn's inner social circle. So he dates the guy's cousin. He becomes best friends with the guy's girlfriend. It's very obvious that his end goal is to get closer to Bryn, to try to approximate some kind of intimacy with a guy that he worships, because I guess he represents everything that he can never have and he never had. There is also a suggestion that Bryn himself is a magic practitioner. The narrator, he sees things, he hears things, he starts to attribute people leaving the university or people having mental breakdowns to Bryn. From his point of view, Bryn is like a dark magician who is orchestrating everything. He is at the center of this universe. It's almost as if he wants to believe that Bryn is some kind of voodoo master when there is a lot of evidence from other people, like his normal friends, that Bryn is no one special, that all these fantastical sightings, there is a rational explanation behind all of them. In a way, the narrator was romanticizing Bryn in order to romanticize his own life. He wants to be part of a grander narrative. He wants to be more than just that unpopular loser in the corner. The story is told in recount. We find out later on that actually he doesn't even remember correctly. His memories of his 2 years in that place are altered. And because Bryn, he died in the peak of his youth, he will always be immortalized in the narrator's head as this unattainable fantasy. I have another book that's not exactly a Halloween read, but I think that it deserves to be an honorary mention. Liars by Sarah Manguso. So there's nothing supernatural going on in this book, but when I was reading it, I felt damn stressed. I don't even feel this stress like watching horror movies. So I think it shows the horror of reality. I guess the horror is in how very possible this could happen to you. This book is about a woman. She's a writer. She marries an artist. And it's only after marrying him and having his children that she realizes what a piece of shit he is. He doesn't help out with the childcare. He belittles her. He tries to squash her writing career. She's on the brink of losing her mind. She is popping pills, and then he has the gall to cheat on her and leave her. When I read this book, I was incandescent with rage, but I kept reading because I recognized that there are many such cases. You just need to go on like r/relationships. You can read about all the shitty things that women have had to endure because they married the wrong guy. I do think that marrying the wrong guy can ruin your entire life if you are surrounded by people who will not support a divorce. If you want like a dose of real life horror, this is the book for you. I still have many books that I want to talk about. Maybe in my next video I'll talk about something lighter. Maybe I'll talk about the YA books that I've read, or like the fun and relaxing books that I've read. Wouldn't that be a change? I also did read quite a few retellings. I'll just group all the retellings together and talk about them all in one go. Yeah, I think that's what I'll do. Okay, happy Halloween. Thanks for watching. Bye.